Welcome back, everyone, from afternoon tea. I'm just going to crack on with our next session. This is the first of two this afternoon of your fireside chats. And this one is called Cultivating Trust, Navigating Agriculture's Social License. So I'm not going to take Ben's advice. I'm going to kick off straight away with an acronym, and that is ESG, as we know as Environmental Social Governance. So ESG considerations increasingly shape business practices and public expectations. The agriculture sector faces new pressures and opportunities to demonstrate responsibility, transparency, and sustainability. This fireside chat will dive into Australian agriculture's social licence, a very crucial factor for staying influential in policy decisions and driving bold industry growth. Now, we've got two wonderful panellists on the stage today, Katie McRobert and Liz Ritchie, who I'll introduce now. So Katie is experienced in the fields of policy research, editing communications, and project management. And she's been part of the Australian Farm Institute team since 2017, holding roles as senior researcher, general manager, before becoming executive director in April 2024. At the AFI, Katie's role provides opportunities to deep dive into evidence-based policy research, focus on the sustainability of agri-food systems in Australia and beyond, work she feels very privileged to be part of. And now for Liz. Liz is the Regional Australia Institute's purpose, for Liz Ritchie, the Regional Australia Institute's purpose of empowering regions to thrive is very personal. As CEO of the RAI, she spearheaded the development of the Regionalisation Ambition, a 10-year, 20-goal framework for regional Australia that aims to rebalance the nation by driving a parity of population between the regions and the cities. Liz describes the ambition as her North Star and firmly believes in Australia where more people live in the regions will lead to a more balanced, a more equitable, more sustainable and more prosperous nation for all. So thank you very much to our panellists, and I'm delighted to be facilitating this session this afternoon. But I'm going to come to both my panellists first and to ask you first your interest and engagement in this conversation. I'll come to you first, Katie.
Wow, that's a really easy question to start off with, Claire. So interest in this particular conversation, the social licence conversation, I think I've got to admit that when I came into agriculture, I've only been in the industry for about 15 years, but it does feel only when you're talking about people who have generations to celebrate of being part of this fantastic industry. Social licence was a new idea to me. I didn't really understand what people meant when they were talking about it. It took me a while to get my head around the fact that it wasn't somebody asking for a certificate to operate in an economy, that you're just generally talking about the trust that somebody holds within their community. The community could be a very small, local, close community that Liz can tell us more about. It could be the wider general community, all of Australia or all of our trading region. So understanding how social licence to operate helps us to trade, to do what we do in agriculture, because we're not doing this for ourselves. Otherwise, we just have vegetable gardens in the backyard and a goat out the front yard. We're doing this because we're part of an economy. Everyone who operates within an economy has to have a social licence to operate, because you have to trust the people that you're trading with. And so I really saw that there were aspects of agriculture coming in as an outsider where agriculture had lost social licence by becoming incredibly defensive around issues it didn't understand what people's problems were with those issues. There was a lot of misinformation, to be fair, coming out, and I think, let's go back all the way to 2011, genetically modified crops was a really good example. There's a lot of press, a lot of media, a lot of hysteria, to be honest, about how genetic modification was going to get into people's foods and then, change your children's genomes somehow magically. And so people were very resistant to the idea of growing GMO crops or selling or having it into their food supply chain. And as somebody who at the time was a mother of some young children and didn't know about the industry, I bought into the fear. Fear is a very powerful motivator. And it took me a while to realise that it wasn't based on anything at all. There was no evidence to support this fear, or the evidence that was being shown to support how these things were going to be disruptive to people's bodies was fake. It wasn't real. And when I realised that there were these powerful forces for good and for bad that were sort of seeming to be on the side of the angels, but yet using distrust to further their own ambitions, I became pretty annoyed that I felt I'd been manipulated. And I really wanted to see better how agriculture could look at what a social licence really means, how transparency can be an assist for a better social licence, but also how we as consumers, all of us in the room are consumers, and hopefully a lot of people here today are also farmers, but we're not us and them, that we're not against, we're not defending each other from something, that we are in this together, and we have to find that point where shared values help us to create a better society that we're all part of. It's a very long-winded answer, sorry.
No, it's wonderful, and there's lots of in that we're going to unpack as we get into some of the really important work that you do, Katie. Liz, I'll come to you. It's good. We're starting with an easy question, but a very important question to get to understand our panelists a bit better as well. But what are you interested in this topic? What's a bit of your experience here?
Well, thank you, Katie, and it's great to be here. And can I congratulate the panel session before us? That was really stimulating, and I thank Ben in particular for your passion around systems, because that's what I'm really, really passionate about, and partly why I'm on this stage this afternoon. But if I take a step back, I mean, I am a farmer's daughter from Deniliquin in the Riverina, and so I have the privilege of being raised on the land, literally from the ground up. And so whilst, and not to shame any farmers in the room, whilst my very proud farmer, provided us with the best of, I guess, the upbringing that we could only dream of, he very much advised me not to marry a farmer and said that it was more important to actually look towards an engineer or electrician. And fortunately, I found an electrician, especially with the energy transition underway. But not to mock the sector at all, because I love agriculture. And I raise that because I'm of a certain age that when I was growing up in my community, we were leaving in droves. We were absolutely told to leave. We were told to search for those big opportunities outside of our beautiful communities, those communities that raised us. And so inadvertently, I went away to boarding school, I went away to university, I did what so many probably in this room have done. And boy, did I quickly realise that I had the benefit of knowing the best of both worlds. And there was something about understanding the symbiotic relationship of big cities and regional Australia that just set a light in me from a very young age, in fact, a fire inside me. And so I went home to Deniliquin when I finished my degree and actually ran the Denny Ute Muster. I was the first festival director, so I know there's people in this room who've been to the Denny Ute Muster and own a ute. But the point that was really important to me at that as a 21-year-old was knowing that I couldn't have the career I wanted in regional Australia and that I would have to ultimately leave again. And so I have been on a path to ensure that regions take their rightful place in the sun, that we think about the future of this nation with regional Australia at the centre, at the core. And so issues around social licence and this really important topic, issues around trust and where we sit today are so important to the transition that we are within, but making towards a better future, reimagining what this country will look like. And the agricultural sector has an enormous role to play. And so that's why I'm here today.
Thank you so much, Liz. And as a facilitator of your panel today, you've seen me as MC throughout the day, but I wanted to state a little bit of my interest in this topic. So I said at the beginning, I'm a very proud Nuffield farming scholar. And I began that journey 3 years ago. I was living in Scotland, from a farm in Scotland, and I was a journalist working in the agricultural industry. And I saw a real step change within sentiment within agriculture over the last few years, particularly around the challenges and I guess the scrutiny facing agriculture. And everywhere I went, I heard from farmers we're under attack, our livelihoods, and it's so deeply connected, their livelihoods, with obviously their work. And I set out on a journey to understand, is there growing anti-farming sentiment happening around the world? And how are farmers responding to that? And actually, Katie and I crossed over in my travels in Australia. And you mentioned the word there about being quite reactive. Yeah. And that was something I was trying to understand, is how is agriculture responding to scrutiny? And one of the things that I found very interesting in that we're talking about trust today. Trust in what we do and all the industries we've talked about today, it's exceptionally high. But actually the understanding of what we do is very, very low. And it's something that is increasing. We've touched on it a little bit in some of our other sectors, some of our panels here today. And when that understanding that really grows, that lack of understanding, that trust becomes very fragile. So that's been something I've been very interested in my research, is how we equip farmers and different stakeholders to really engage in these conversations and to start cultivating trust and building trust and making sure we really bring that understanding levels together. But I'm going to really kick off the session before we sort of invite questions from the room. And I'm going to touch on the difference between, very basically, ESG and social license. So ESG, let's think about it as formalized expectations, frameworks, metrics, reporting, compliance. And if we look at social license, it's that informal trust. It's around those deeply embedded values, around the perceptions people have of what we do. And it's often something that we don't really think about, and we're probably all very guilty of that until it starts to disappear. And that's when it becomes really real. And for this discussion, it's interesting. I'm often asked, is ESG, has it become a proxy for trust, given that agricultural production is really moving away from those population centres? But even if you are ESG compliant, that doesn't mean that you have social license. It is not guaranteed. If you fail to explain or engage with your stakeholders, and we heard Ben talk about it earlier, we heard Tony talk about it as well, that phrase we've often heard is taking people on that journey with you. So quite interesting to think about that as we have our discussions. And Katie, I'm going to come back to you. I've said there about social license. How is social license earned? That's quite a broad question to you, and are we doing a good job?
How's it earned in agriculture?
Yes.
I think you're right to point out, Claire, that really clear difference between ESG and social license and trust, because they are related. They're not the same thing, and they can't be conflated together, particularly when ESG, as you rightly noted, is basically a reporting tool. It's a reporting system which is intended to move people towards a more trusted position in society, but it is not a proxy for trust in and of itself. How is social license earned? It's earned by relationship, having a good relationship with someone. It's not necessarily you must do the right thing all the time, or you must abide by other people's rules. Think about it in purely just a relational term about people you're friends with, and the people that you have social license, you have trust with. You don't have that trust because you just think that you'll give it away freely. You have that because you've got a relationship with somebody, you understand what their motives are, you understand where they're heading and why they made the choices that they did. And even if you don't necessarily agree with the choices that they've made, you can back them and you can understand why they made the choices. And it's okay to sometimes be different as well. So it's not about following a rule book or bowing to somebody else's demands. That is not what social license is about. It is very frustrating for me, and you can hear it coming through in my voice, when I hear people in agriculture say, I don't want to follow this woke agenda, no one's going to tell me what to do. A, there's no such thing as a woke agenda, that's a made-up thing, so just let that go. But B, nobody's asking you to. No one's forcing you to. People will always have differences of opinion. It's up to you as an agricultural producer or somebody working within the supply chain, or even in a policy position, which I imagine more of the people in the room are at this stage. It's up to you to understand what those other people you're in relationship with are asking of you, to understand where you do need to meet and compromise, or where you do need to hold firm and say, no, these are my values and I'm sticking to them, but to be able to have that respectful relationship. So we see, we talked a lot a couple of years ago about the advocacy work that the Australian Farm Institute undertook for National Farmers Federation, and thanks to Tony Ma for kicking that project off, if you're still in the room. Looking through that report, we realised that most advocacy organisations in Australia treat advocacy pretty much as a shouting match. They want to get the attention, they feel very defensive, and they feel put upon, and as you found out through your studies as well, a lot of farmers and a lot of people working within agriculture feel like society's out to get them, and most of the time it's not really. There are some noisy voices in echo chambers that say those things. It's not a sentiment widely held across the Australian public, certainly. It might be different in different countries, but in Australia, farmers have an exceptionally high level of trust in society. So acting defensively just puts you further away from social license and from trust. Acting relationally and talking about what the issues are and finding where you have shared values and shared outcomes that you will work towards, that's how you build social license and trust. It's one of the reasons the Farm Institute was really proud to be part of building the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework, again with the NFF and funded by the Department of Agriculture, because that outlines 19 principles that are very clear outcomes that we can all agree we want to get to, but we can also all agree that there are different ways we're going to get to those outcomes. So yes, we all do want clean water, And there are different ways we manage waterways to have those other outputs along the road to the outcome. But if we can agree on the outcome, then we can find a way to get there together.
Katie, I'm gonna bring up this report that you did a few years ago, and Katie was very kind at the time and shared this with me, and it was fascinating because you talked about the number of advocacy groups representing agriculture. And Liz, I will bring you in a second on this, but you've mentioned it now, so I want to bring it up. And you talked about, and your research found this idea of the one-man bands making a lot of noise. But really, does that have cut through? Is it really sending a coherent message to government? And I love the analogy you use about finding an orchestra and really playing in tune and finding that symphony. Do we have a lot of work to do to get our ship in order in agriculture and to start cutting through in a really coherent way and actually playing in tune?
You said ship, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
I think I heard something else there. We do have a very long way to go, unfortunately. The report was very well received. We spoke to, we didn't make it up, we spoke to people in agricultural advocacy, we spoke to people in decision-making positions, and we asked them for their perspectives, and that's what we put into the report, as well as a lot of literature review as well. So it was well received at the time, and most people said to me when I talked about it off the record, I can see that the biggest problem here is egos, and as soon as all those other egos get out of the room, then I'll be able to do what I need to do. I think there's a problem here. It's about being able to work together, and it's very difficult to find people who do step into leadership positions, because it attracts a certain kind of person, who are willing to put the ego aside and work with someone else, regardless of who gets the credit or who gets to take the biggest prize home at the end of the day, to be able to get a greater good outcome. Because most of the organisations also rely on attention being one of the impact areas that they're demonstrating back to their memberships as well. But if you do think about being able to make that impact, so the people we spoke to on the other side of advocacy, the people on the receiving end, said they were really frustrated because they got all these different voices coming at them, and some of them were saying the same thing and some different things. They just didn't know who they were supposed to trust, because a lot of those relationships weren't trustworthy. And if you think about, I was talking to someone about this at lunchtime, whether you wanted to be in the room with someone you see as a trusted negotiator, might be firm but fair, but you trust them to negotiate, as opposed to someone who's going to throw a tantrum every time you bring up a topic, you don't want to be in the room with the person throwing the tantrum. But in agriculture, we treat advocacy as if it's about half tantrums. That's what we do. Other industries don't do that. It's a unique thing that Australian agriculture does, and it's not a positive thing.
And Liz, I might bring you in on that point there as well. The work that you're doing, it's much wider than agriculture. And we've heard Katie talk there about sometimes the egos that can get in the way. You're working across lots of different sectors, making up regional communities. Do you have any sort of reflections or comments that you can add to that and things that you've experienced with your work?
Yeah, and thank you, Katie. I think that was a beautiful description about the difference. And I think just to add to that kind of conversation around social license, I guess what I immediately think of is social impact and the impact of people in place. And that really speaks to the heart of the Regional Australia Institute and why we exist. We are Australia's only think tank dedicated to regional issues. But really, if you get down to the nuts and bolts of what we do, it is about people in community. And so social licence to act is all about the ripples that your sector make within and across regional Australia. And, you know, there's much to celebrate. Again, a proud farmer's daughter, you've got a big celebration today in meeting that target, and congratulations to the sector. That is an incredible example of systems at work, of having a bold goal, setting a vision, having a wraparound of actors who are stepping towards a bold goal. And it was achieved, and it was achieved early. What we've tried to do at the Institute is understand that we need to lift our gaze across Australia as a nation to ensure that we are working with all sectors to rebalance the nation, which is our vision. This is the vision that sits at the heart of what we call the Regionalisation Ambition 2032. It is a 10-year plan, and it was very much inspired by the roadmap and some of the work in the sustainability framework. There's so much good work out there, but that inspiration to recognise that the problems that regional Australia has faced back when I was, in my early 20s, that deficit lens, that poor narrative, poor old regional Australia, is changing, and it's changing rapidly. But we aren't changing as a system, and we aren't thinking about the potential of regional Australia. We aren't reimagining what the country could look like, using the talent and resources of every sector. I mean, I know Katie's point about how the ag sector undertakes advocacy. I mean, I watch closely. I have many friends in the ag sector. Many are our members and friends through alliances. And there's times where I watch with just complete admiration, honestly. I mean, the sector is gutsy. You're loud when you need to be, and you often succeed. And in a way, I have admired that. But there is a shadow side to operating that way, and I think that's the point you're making. In our, what I would call our domain around regional development policy, we tread more lightly. We don't have the strength of the ag sector. I think it's incredible, the breadth of knowledge and the breadth of the industry and its power. You want to utilise that. And so what I would love to see is the ag sector saying, what do we need to do to ensure that regional Australia reaches its full potential, not just the ag sector?
It's very obvious that this is your North Star, as I pointed out at the beginning. And I guess some questions around this really speaks to me. I mean, maybe we become a bit too inward-looking in agriculture. We do tend to operate within those echo chambers. And you made the point there, Liz, around we've got this great political clout. How are we using that to advocate for the other areas that make up the social fabric of our rural communities? Is there advice that you would give, or what's your kind of call to action that, as within agriculture, need to be doing better?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are certainly many organisations and people I know in this room who have taken a deep interest in, I guess, what we would call soft infrastructure. So issues around housing, health, education, childcare, community services. This is what makes up the social fabric of our lives, our day-to-day our day-to-day lifestyles. And I guess the Institute's done a lot of work in understanding what we would broadly call, livability. And regional Australia is on the up. I mean, I have literally launched a report 2 weeks ago that takes the market sentiment of city dwellers, and we are now looking at 1 in 3 city dwellers. So more than 5 million people want to move to regional Australia. But the most interesting piece of information in this latest research is that the people who want to move are our Gen Z, under 29 years of age. Now, cast back to when I was 21, I mean, you just couldn't have imagined that would happen. You couldn't have imagined that the pendulum would swing that much. Now, understanding why is really important. So obviously COVID supercharged movement back to regional Australia, but it was happening before COVID. So, the dream is still very much alive, the dream of a home, and it's now unattainable in our cities. And so one of the biggest drivers is actually housing affordability and also cost of living. So you've got finance up front and centre for our Gen Zs, which makes a lot of sense when you think about, the social contracts broken for that generation in many, many ways. But the second theme for why they want to move is all about lifestyle and all about what is really at the heart of regional Australia, and that is that sense of connection with people and community and the environment, the opportunity to have time and space and to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. And anyone who was brought and raised in a regional community knows exactly what I'm talking about. That dream is not dead. In fact, people are seeking it out. They don't want to live in the capital cities. We don't want to be a nation of mega cities. So what are we doing as a nation to reimagine, and let's use the theme, rethink population and settlement in this country?
Yeah. I was going to pick up on a couple of things that Liz said there too, because that connection of agricultural success and regional success. You know, they're intertwined, obviously. We don't need to spell that out to people in the room, and yet we still sometimes overlook it. And when talking about the power, Liz, of that combined approach or that cooperative approach to addressing policy. So instead of saying the regions need this and hopefully that will also benefit other things, or agriculture needs this and that should have a flow-on effect, we're pretty sure. Being able to go to a policymaker, if you're thinking about social license, it's not just people you are selling product to, you're also selling ideas to them. And if you want better policy, and you can go into a room and say, this region would benefit from an agricultural investment which would then have these flow-on effects for livability, which would improve the education facilities in the town, which in turn will develop more people who are going to be able to contribute to the ag industry in 20 years. And maybe you can show some of those cyclic and systemic changes. And agriculture needs to recognise too that we don't operate in a bubble. We know that we don't, and yet we still act like we do. It's very much an us and them conversation much of the time, and it shouldn't be, and it needn't be for social licence.
Oh, what such interesting contribution. I'm just realising I do want to let the room know, if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your inflatable batons, not inflatable batons, your light batons into the air and catch my attention.
Good luck getting a word in with us on the stage, but you know,
I just want to make sure do raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I know firesides can be a little bit intimate in that sense. Before we move on, we've got a question. We've got a question here. We'll just wait until the mic. If you could introduce yourself as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Martin Cole from Wine and also chair of the Council of RDCs. Love the conversation. How do we translate that into a political imperative, given the focus on cost of living and all of that? I mean, I'd really be interested in your thoughts on that one.
Oh, thank you. I have a lot of thoughts. I honestly believe it needs leadership. It needs our Prime Minister to stand up and say, we need to rethink how this country looks. We know we've got a major productivity challenge, and one of the ways that we could address that is to understand that the benefits of agglomeration are broken in our big cities. We've got the evidence, we know this. The greatest benefits are going to come from our second and third tier cities, regional cities, and then obviously the agricultural sector footprint is right across the nation. But we do know that there's a really important role between the kind of hub and spokes. So if you think about population movement and where people are going, they are going to those larger regional centres. But then there's a ripple effect, and that keeps evolving. And we know that lifestyle areas are also elevating. I mean, all aspects of regional Australia are growing, whether they're industry, service towns, heartland, lifestyle, regional cities. So we, we try many approaches. At the moment, I'm pushing the line of productivity. But what we need is, again, it's a sector approach. We need every department in both federal and state level to understand that they have a responsibility in evolving regional Australia, in ensuring that we can prosper into the future. It can't be, too often I'm confined to the Department of Transport and Infrastructure, Regional Development, Arts and Sports. So regional development has been put in a bucket amongst other very important aspects of the economy, notwithstanding that. But why aren't we linked to agriculture? Why aren't we linked to health? Why aren't we linked to, yes, there's regional domains within those departments, but the conversation is diluted by the sheer architecture of our government. And so we need to rethink the architecture, which will change the notion of how decisions are made. And I want regional Australia and its opportunities to be elevated to the highest office.
I think there's also, if you're considering what makes a political imperative, the word imperative is key there too. People act when there's a burning platform to act because of. We saw in Maximo's presentation this morning that we are already exceeding planetary boundaries in many cases, and we know that agriculture and regional Australia holds the key to food security in this country. We act like food security is a nice to have. It is much more important than that, because we can see from, again, those presentations this morning, some of which were deeply troubling, I've got to be honest, how fragile those supply chains are and how quickly things can turn. We were very lucky to come through COVID as well as we did, but if we know that we have these climate change-led pressures, geopolitical pressures, and we do need to provide food security, and we've got a strategy literally on the table that people are working on today, tomorrow, the next 6 months. I'm not quite sure if Matt and Joe are still here. They can tell us how long it's going to take, but they're looking to develop this strategy and they want to do it collaboratively. So we do have an imperative, and we also have in agriculture a really high level of trust in that trust bank. If you think about trust as, you make deposits, you withdraw them out as well. We've got a lot of trust in there. So we can afford to also be a bit transparent and say, we are kicking gold out of the park on this, and this front, but we're also struggling over here, and we need to have a combined effort with regional Australia, with health, with infrastructure, with all of the places where we have difficulties to work together on this, and taking that combined approach and saying we're here to collaborate and we're here to listen and be open and honest will help get attention. But food security strategies, open, ready for the taking.
Liz, you wanted to add something?
I did want to add, one of the things that we've launched late last year is called 40 for the regions. And this is something that the sector can absolutely get behind, as well as all other sectors. We wrapped this campaign around our third year progress report because this number 40 kept coming towards us like a bright light. So we're edging towards 40% of Australia's population. We produce just under 40% of our GDP. We've had a call for a 40% carve out in all investment, so in particular housing. So the 1.2 million homes, we've called for 40% of those homes to be in regional Australia. So understanding that we need to have our fair share. So when you think about that, and I could give many more examples of where 40% sits, what we don't have is 40% representation of regional voices who understand their place, who understand regional Australia sitting at the table where decisions are made. And many of you in this room will be in the same circumstance that I often find myself, as a lone regional voice sitting, and lucky to be invited to some of those tables, the ministerial advisory tables, the various councils that government pull together to create and make decisions about our future. And yet we're not duly represented. So 40 for the regions is a really important and easy initiative to roll out in your organisations, not just your board roles, your leadership positions, advisory councils that your organisations are using. Thinking about how we can have a proportionate voice in this nation so that we can achieve our ambition and that we can see the prosperity of regional Australia increase.
I think there's a question that's come in that I think you'll both really like, and thank you very much. Rebecca Vosin, I hope I've probably pronounced your name incorrectly, but thank you for your question. She's asking, my research demonstrated that some globalised sustainability actions messaging for agriculture is not always locally relevant. How do we ensure that social licence is driven by place-based evidence and not global narratives to prevent further sustainability setbacks? Do you want to start on that?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk to Rebecca about this. Come and find me at the drinks afterwards to see exactly what kind of messaging we're talking about here too. But sometimes, yes, those big ambitious goals that are put out by OECD, global organisations can seem unattainable and can seem irrelevant, particularly when Australian farmers operate in such a very different production environment than most of our counterparts in other parts of the world. However, that's why we developed the Australian Ag Sustainability Framework, to try and translate those back down towards where an Australian context was important, and that was created with a huge amount of input from people working and living in regional Australia and working on farm and also working in natural resources management, as well as looking to what people are asking from an overseas perspective. But I think that underscoring of place-based solutions, Liz, you can talk more about this, I'm sure, but it's absolutely critical. But having a big, hairy goal, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you can translate that ambition to a regionally relevant place-based solution. I think I've lost my way. I'll hand over.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't speak to so much, I guess, those global trends, but really happy to talk about place-based solutions. I mean, this is really the 101 of regional development, and you see it everywhere you go. So regional communities and regional people at large are incredibly innovative by necessity, because we don't have the resources. There is a massive chasm in investment, and there's a disparity in outcomes. And that is what you will see in the regionalisation ambition. But we don't want to promote the disparity. We want to work through a lens of optimism and aspiration, which is exactly why we've called it the regionalisation ambition. But what we're seeking to solve is a levelling of the playing field here. We want to see equal education outcomes. We want to see equal skilled worker outcomes. I mean, I love thinking about the employment market at large. I mean, the ag sector, if you went back 15, 16 years ago, you know, one of the number one job vacancies was in a low-skilled, unskilled roles, and probably a large number of them would have been in the agricultural sector. Fast forward to where we are now, and the largest amount of jobs available across regional Australia are in the highly skilled professional sphere. So the regional economies have become far more sophisticated than they once were, offering opportunities that we could have only ever dreamt of when we were raised in places like Deniliquin. And so a lot of our work is busting that myth, and we want to celebrate that there are incredible careers across regional Australia, and that you shouldn't be discriminated by your postcode. So what is it that we need to do to further educate citizens across Australia? And we know it's working, because again, to that market research that we launched a couple of weeks ago, 5 years ago when we first did that research, one of the number one barriers for people moving to regional Australia was this idea that there were no job opportunities, and that they would have a less career development. And so what we've seen in that 5-year period is that's now moved from the first barrier to the 5th barrier, and hopefully next time we take it, it'll be off the list altogether, because that education is permeating. People understand that those opportunities exist right across regional Australia, and we want to celebrate that. And the ag sector's done an enormous amount to build those careers. We just want to make sure that those opportunities are mobile, that we do not hold people back from their dream of living in regional Australia because we've got a desire for presenteeism over output. And I'm really passionate about this. I now run my organisation from the beautiful Bega Valley, and we have to understand what we can unlock when we enable mobility to be just that, mobile.
Liz, tomorrow we've got a whole session looking at innovation. And obviously as agriculture begins to innovate, automates, there's going to be less jobs. And to you talking about having those jobs available, so that 49% of Gen Z that want to relocate to those regional areas, they have those opportunities. What do you feel that agriculture can better do as they begin to innovate and they begin to automate, to make sure we're getting behind other projects, to really invest in and drive support in those regional communities?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the point about the need for all the actors in the system to lift their gaze and look more broadly beyond the sector that you work in. Speaking of, place-based examples, there are a huge amount of new housing initiatives that are being driven from the ground up. And what is it that your sector could do to get behind those local initiatives? Whether it's childcare, again, place-based childcare centres and facilities opening up to fill the need that is there. And what's so interesting about the systems conversation, and I know you referred to it from an agricultural context, but again, lift our sights and think about the fact that we can't fill the jobs that we have across the whole of our nation unless we're attracting people to our communities. But we can't attract the people we need and the skills we need unless we've got the houses. We can't build the houses unless we've got the right people, the technical skills to make that happen. And we can't support all of that unless we've got the services and the soft infrastructure that make that happen. So it is incumbent on all of us, regardless of what hat you wear and what role you have, to push outside of the sector that you operate in and understand the impact, back to social licence and social impact, impact that your sector is having on place, and get really down into the detail on that.
There's some wonderful call to actions in there, Liz. We've got a question in the room.
G'day, Daryl Anderson here from Anvil Media, and I think this is a question mostly or primarily for Katie, but encourage Claire and Liz to respond as well. I want to take you back to the social licence question and particularly the GM example that you gave, Katie, early on. And we had a situation back, 25 years ago or whatever it was, where what you later discovered to be nonsense or misinformation resulted in a denial of social licence, and so we had a moratorium against new GM commercialisation of genetically modified organisms. How, using your approach where you're talking about social licence, how would you apply what you now regard as the right way to establish social licence to that? What would you do differently, and would you have any hope of a better outcome?
Daryl, it's the most complicated question you could possibly ever ask. I think I know what you're getting at here. So how would you, looking at that example, how could we then put social licence into practice ahead of time rather than being reactive? Is that fairly close to what you're asking? I think they whisked the microphone away from you, but that's just to clarify, sorry, because I want to make sure I give it.
Sorry, where denial of social licence is based on nonsense.
Right. Yeah, so that's not a problem in today's environment.
Should we fold, or how can we avoid being compelled to fold when the other side is simply wrong?
Well, in that case, though, too, the other side, which was wrong, then has folded back the other way and the moratorium is no longer in place. We have to, though, recognise that both things can be true. Sometimes there will be misinformation that forces agriculture into a corner that is very uncomfortable. Sometimes it is not misinformation, it is just information that is uncomfortable for us to hear. And knowing the difference between those two things, an example would be the phasing out of live sheep exports, that the industry did make a lot of statements about being surprising and being caught off guard, where they really had years and years of very clearly signalled notice, and they were told that they had lost their social licence for that industry, and yet still acted surprised when the social licence was literally made into legislation. GM is a good example in that there was a pretty powerful set of lobby groups warring with each other that had a lot of resources in place as well. And so sometimes you don't have the resources to combat misinformation, disinformation in the campaign, the same way that the campaign is run by someone with an opposing view. But this is where that relationship comes really strongly into play. Because if you have trust and if you have the relationship with the people making policy, and you can say, this is wrong, let me talk to you about why I'm telling you it's wrong. I'm not just shouting because somebody else is telling me that my stuff is bad and I would like to see things go differently, but the information isn't correct. If you've got the relationship, then you can actually have a discussion and then hopefully you avoid those bad outcomes. But if it's just protest signs versus protest signs, then the people making the policies don't know what to base their decisions on. They're time poor like the rest of us. Nobody sits around having time going, oh, I'm going to read another 1,000-word report tonight on how genetically modified organisms did not cause cancer in rats in France. After all, people don't have the time to do that. They're time poor and they make decisions based on the available information. But if you're a trusted partner and you can come and say, let's have a conversation, let's take this in a different direction, then hopefully you can steer away from those things. Having said that, the systems now driving misinformation and disinformation in our society are incredibly powerful and incredibly insidious, and most of us don't realise on a daily basis how often we're impacted by them, and just literally how many lies cross our eyeballs every single day. This is probably a conversation we'll have to put into the drinks afterwards, because this is something I could go on about for a very long time. But being a critical reader and a critical thinker when it comes to that kind of information, and having discussions with people that demonstrate your critical thinking, not being polarising in your responses, but saying, I don't understand this, can you help me work through it, makes you the kind of trusted, hopefully, partner that can have the conversations and avoid those negative outcomes.
I realise you've only got a minute to go. I might, as my prerogative as chair, I might take an extra minute if that's okay. But I wanted to bring it back to the word education. We've not really probably got into that as deeply in this conversation. And I found when I was doing my travels, when it came to social licence, I found that farmers kept saying, nobody understands what we do, we need to educate the public. And I mean, I heard this all over the world as I was travelling, and it was, we need to educate, we need to educate. And it came across as somewhat arrogant about that idea that they should understand what we do, but there perhaps wasn't that curiosity for others and their needs. And I know, Liz, you'll probably be thinking you've come across this quite a lot. And I guess just something, maybe a comment on that as well, is that something we need to get better? Actually, if we want to think about cultivating trust, building that social license, maybe just a final couple of things from both of you. What do we need to be better at actually showing up and listening and engaging and actually building that trust really from a really grounded way? Maybe Liz, I'll come to you first.
Oh, look, what I'd like to close on, Claire, is actually coming back to social licence and thinking about, as I've talked about, lifting our sights as a sector and thinking about the community as a whole. And the burning platform at the moment is, of course, the energy transition. But you could go back a couple of decades, it's the mining boom. There's different cycles. And one of the things that we've been researching at the Institute is the impact of social licence and creating a legacy that we can see benefits from, in this case, the energy transition. And I know, obviously, Tony spoke about this in the last panel session. But what we have is, it's a vexing topic and not something that we're going to solve easily, not something that is solved easily. But what we've failed to do in the narrative with the energy transition is understand that it's people at its centre. And so in talking and thinking about all the different levers in this space, we've come up with a new concept that we're calling the real deal, regional energy and legacy deal. And what this does is give regional communities the decision-making power and agency. Think about a triangle. They're sitting at the top, directing and steering the growth and aspiration of their community. In the bottom corner of this triangle lies the industry. So many of you in this room, industry players, what contribution, or if you're in the energy sector, what contribution are you making to ensure that this can be pooled funding that can be scaled to meet that aspiration? And the third corner is government. So if you're really serious about meeting these targets, then you need to match the aspiration of the communities and help them achieve what they want to achieve. There are billions of dollars making their way to regional Australia, both through this sector and the energy sector and the mining sector. What are we doing to scale that investment, to close some of the gaps, to enhance that social infrastructure that I've talked about? So the real deal is a concept that we are talking about widely with government at all levels, because this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to try to get this right. We can't just keep looking to government to solve all of this. Industry has a role, and I mean all sectors. So thinking creatively, it's a little bit like regional deals for anybody from that policy space. It's akin to that, but it's slightly different. And it's making sure that all of our aspirations are being met in a really innovative but constructive way. And what's most important about this idea is that people are at the centre, people are leading the way, they have the agency, and the one and only thing that anyone across regional Australia will ask you for is more decision-making power. So this would enable that and it would unlock it. So let's start talking about the potential of the real deal.
Thank you, Liz. And sorry, Katie, to push you at the end of time here, but even just a final couple of comments from yourself, really going back to that title, Cultivating Trust and Social Licence in Australian Agriculture.
Yeah. So I think social licence is every person's responsibility. It's an individual's responsibility to maintain trust with someone else. But really, and what I hope people will hear today, the leaders in the room, it is a direct responsibility of leadership, people in leadership positions. And agriculture does love to tell our story, and we like to educate people, and we like to think that if only we could just tell people more about what we're doing, things will be better. Things are also pretty good right now for Australian farmers in terms of trust, so let's use that while we have it. I think of a really powerful example. There's a great science communicator, Dr. Alison van Inenum, she's an Australian who works in the US, has been there for a very long time. This goes back to the GMO discussion too. So she works in genetically modified agricultural output. She specifically works in livestock. And she got really upset in these days where the protests were very heated. People would come and camp outside UC Davis with signs, and she was personally targeted and attacked. And she had a light bulb moment when she walked outside to talk to one of the protesters and said, rather than, let me just tell you why what we're doing is important and why we're trying to actually fix this problem, instead of saying, let me tell you what I'm doing, she said, you tell me why you're so upset. What upsets you about this? And she started talking about the foods and the genes and that everywhere. She said, no, not about the genes. What's upsetting you? Why are you upset about this? And she said, I'm worried for my kids. And Alison said, me too. I'm really worried for my kids. That's why I do what I do. And then they had a conversation. And I don't think anybody changed their minds completely on that day, but both of them had an understanding that by looking at where you do have a shared concern, whether it's a shared problem or a shared goal that you're working towards, then that is how you build trust, and that's how you can build social licence. And I hope that the agricultural leaders, I know a lot of them do already, but I hope that they take that very seriously as a responsibility for our industry.
What a lovely way to finish. And I think often when we think of communication, we think of talking, but actually we don't think about the role of listening in communication. So thank you for so succinctly explaining that to us. But I'm going to have to pause it there. We've slightly gone over time, but what a fascinating conversation. I'm sure it could have gone on all afternoon. But Liz and Katie, thank you so much for your time on this important topic.
Thanks, Claire.